Welcome to Sustainable in the City, where Nashville sustainability champions take the spotlight. Join Urban Green Lab and the Nashville Department of Waste Services as we dive deep into the stories of everyday Nashvillians. We'll chat with your neighbors, coworkers, and fellow community members about the small sustainable actions that are making a big impact on Nashville. From reducing waste to planting trees, our guests will share their stories about the benefits, barriers, and motivators behind everyday choices. Tune in and be inspired by the power of individual action. This is Sustainable in the City.
Hi there, welcome to Sustainable in the City. My name is Allie Omens. I'm with the Nashville Department of Waste Services. We're a department of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. We educate and provide outreach to residents across Nashville to learn how to reduce, reuse, recycle, compost, and properly dispose of their waste.
And I'm Karissa Hampton. I am the Assistant Director of Households with Urban Green Lab. We are a Nashville-based nonprofit that teaches communities to live sustainably in all the places where we learn, work, and live. If you haven't listened to our last episode, be sure to check that out. We hosted an Urban Green Lab staff member, Sophia. She was on here to talk about My City Academy, in the way that the government works with, immigrants and new Nashvillians to learn about the way that our government works here in Nashville. Sophia's tip was to lead by example. And I think that I lead by example every single day with my children. It's kind of inevitable. However, I really saw the power of leading by example when we did the community cleanup recently. We did have to reschedule it, and we were hoping that more people would show up. But once we were out there and people saw us, then they were joining in, which was a great example of leading by example or modeling that behavior. What about you, Allie?
Well, that's awesome, Karissa, and that's a reference to our past guest, Leland, right? His birthday cleanup. How was that? You mentioned it was maybe not as highly attended as it could have been because it was so cold.
Right. Yeah, it actually was, the sun came out for a good part of the day, so I think we were fine with weather. It was just the attendance because we did have to take a rain check, but it was great.
Yeah, well, but Leland's out there cleaning up his community, and we love that we were able to host him on Sustainable in the City. And for my tip, I actually want to kick it over to executive producer Simone to talk about how she leads by example. Executive producer Simone?
Well, thanks, Allie. So one of the things that I've done in my life, Allie and I work for Metro Nashville government, of course, and with Waste Services, and we talk to a lot of people about the drop-off composting sites at the convenience centers. So in my own house, what I do is, since I live in a two-person household, I have room in the freezer, so I keep a paper bag in the freezer whenever I get them from takeout or the grocery store. I save those instead of recycling them. I'll just put them in my freezer and put all my food scraps and compost in them and use that to take it to the convenience center for the drop-off composting site. That's nice because it doesn't get too stinky, and I'm not the most green thumb of a person, so I don't have to worry about trying to figure out how to compost. I've gotten my brother, my sister-in-law, all of my friends to start doing that too. So we rotate on going to the convenience center. Everyone's got their little bag in their freezer that they take things to. So just kind of like an easy entry point into composting and just leading by example.
That's wonderful. Thank you, Executive Producer Simone, for composting and for producing Sustainable in the City. Now, to transition us to today's episode, we are speaking with a Metro Nashville Beautification Commissioner, which means that she volunteers to make Nashville a cleaner and greener city in her free time. And I know we've had a few episodes now about litter and beautification across the time that we've had Sustainable in the City, but I really want to emphasize that I think the reason that we keep coming back to it is that it's such an accessible way to be sustainable in Nashville and just in your community in general, making a direct impact. So our guest will tell us what beautification means to her and help us learn about beautification efforts happening in a Nashville neighborhood near you.
Yes, and that District 24 Commissioner and special guest today is Kate Parrish. Thank you so much for joining us in the studio today, Kate.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
And so let's start off with your story. Can you take us back to the beginning of what really sparked your interest in sustainability?
Sure. I grew up in Nashville. I grew up in West Nashville, and sustainability has always been an important part of my life, but I feel like that word hasn't really come into common language until the last, probably decade or so, as far as, the public really taking a hold of an understanding of that word. So for me, growing up, I lived in a household where we recycled, where we planted trees, we volunteered. I spent a lot of time outside just in my neighborhood. And then also growing up near the Warner Parks, I spent a lot of time in nature, riding bikes, hiking, taking walks. So I think, it kind of came to me naturally through my upbringing and my relationship to the outdoors. And so that sort of just naturally unfolded in my life in different ways as I got older.
Gotcha. And were there any other early experiences or books or mentors that really shaped the way you think about it?
So I was definitely a huge reader growing up, and that was a real escape for me as well as being outdoors. And so I like to combine the two activities. And we had this tree in my front yard that was a great climbing tree. And there was a set of branches that just made a perfect little seat. And so I would climb up there with a book and just escape into this imaginary world of whatever I was reading inside of the enclosure of a tree. And it was so magical and like this little retreat where I could be outdoors and experiencing nature while also enjoying this otherwise kind of quote unquote indoor activity. And so I think there is also a relationship for me between the outdoors, conservation, sustainability, and imagination, curiosity, an active interest in learning more or escaping into a world where with books I can have a greater understanding of communities and cultures and experiences different from my own.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for sharing. And you mentioned specifically about the environment in Nashville and some of the disconnect that maybe can be felt between the benefits that we know these natural spaces have and our experiences every day as residents. What are some ways that you can think of or that you have participated in to strengthen the connection between nature as an urban resident or a resident living in a city?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it can be difficult to find ways to merge the natural world with an urban environment, but by and large, that's what most Nashvillians are living in, unless you're in some of the outer suburbs or farthest reaches of the county. So I think one easy way to just engage in the natural world is just to be outdoors. We are so fortunate.
Right.
We are so fortunate in Nashville to have so many incredible parks and greenways and blueways, and there's just source here of ways to be a part of a larger ecosystem, literally and figuratively. And I think spending time in nature really does something internally to us as humans, which then creates these positive feelings that we want to return to. It's like, when you're a kid and you're in elementary school and you get recess, you're like, yes, this is the best part of the day because you're just outside. And for me, even that first moment that I go outside every day, I'm like, oh, yes, okay. I'm back on this planet, feet are on the ground, and that connection can happen at any time. It doesn't have to happen in, the Redwood Forest or even the Warner Parks. It can just be going outside and looking up and looking around and being engaged and present in the world around you.
Mm-hmm. It's funny now that you say that. I'm thinking about over the weekend, I saw the first daffodil come up.
Yes.
The first that I've seen in my neighborhood. And those little moments like that, I think, can foster the appreciation for your surroundings. And
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, yes, when you see those first flowers of the year start to pop up, it is this beautiful reminder of the passage of time in in a good way, not like, oh, I'm winding down on this mortal coil, but more of like, oh, wow, renewal, change, hope, optimism, and all of those things are kind of happening just on this like intuitive, biological, chemical level. And that is such a great feeling to tap into, and we can access that anytime, just stepping outdoors.
You kind of speak like you're in a book, which I appreciate. And you mentioned last time we spoke that you like to cultivate experiences for children in nature. Why is that so important to you, and what impact have you seen?
Well, so one thing I want to make clear is I'm not a super outdoorsy person. So I talk a lot about the outdoors and nature, but I think I want to be really clear about who I am and that I'm not somebody who enjoys sleeping outdoors.
You read books in a tree.
I read books in a tree, and then I went inside my home and slept in my bed. But I bring that up because I think there can be a real point of friction or of misunderstanding that to be somebody that's interested in sustainability or conservation, you need to be a card-carrying REI member that is, got your ice crampons in your backpack ready to go at any time for, whatever sort of granola mission is up next. And I love that for those folks. That's not me. I like to be outside. I say that I am not outdoorsy. I'm outsidey. And, so I want to say that just to open the door to anybody who's like, no, that is not me. Please don't put me in that bucket, because I'm with you too. But so relating that back to children and nature and cultivating these experiences for them is just the introduction of nature to children, especially in an urban environment, is so important because access is what gives us the ability to tap into those other communities or cultures or lifestyles or experiences that then make us more empathetic people, more well-rounded people, whatever. There is something so special about pulling a weed out of the ground and being able to see its root system and know this is an invasive species and it's going to actually harm these other plants, and just starting to build that relationship, whether it's reading a book in a tree or planting buttercups or whatever. But I think the earlier we can engage children with the outdoors and the ideas surrounding conservation and sustainability, then that creates habits and behaviors that they'll take with them forever. I mean, that's how it happened for me. These behaviors just became second nature to me. So we can, engage kids in this really powerful way with something outside of four walls or devices.
Mm-hmm. This makes me think of a topic on the Sustainable in the City program when it was a webinar format. We talked about engaging children in nature, that similar subject matter, that if we can teach these principles when folks are young, that they can bring these experiences through the rest of their life and have that real appreciation for the natural world. I think it was Unearthing Joy, I want to say, was the program. We'll link it in the show notes so folks can go back and watch it.
Yeah, and I think it's the exposure to a lot of different ways to engage with the environment, because you are going to have some kids that are like, yes, I want to camp every day for the rest of my life.
Dig in the dirt.
And dig in the dirt, yes. Or, somebody like me, I am just like in love with picking up litter. Like, it's weird, but I love it. And so the more opportunities you can show kids, and really just anybody, all the different ways that you can be involved in conservation and sustainability, then somebody is going to find their lane and stick with it.
Yeah. Let's talk more about your love for picking up litter, leading into being a beautification commissioner. How did you come to join the Beautification Commission? How did you learn about it? Tell us about that.
So I'm very new to the commission. I just started last fall. This is a volunteer commitment, and Metro is, of course, filled with all different kinds of volunteer boards and commissions, and the Beautification and Environment Commission is one of those. And we have a commissioner for every district in the city, and the role of that person is to take efforts and use Metro resources to create a cleaner, safer, more attractive Nashville. And that can take a lot of different forms. But so far in my role, just getting started with them in the last few months, has been understanding all of the resources that are available to Davidson County residents, specifically through their commissioner. And you asked how I found out about it. Well, kind of on accident. You know, I'm a lifelong Nashvilleian. I've lived in my district for several years and keep a relatively good pulse on local government and what's going on. And I had no idea that this commission existed. No clue. And so I reached out to my council person about a pollinator garden. So District 24 includes Sylvan Park, which is the neighborhood I live in, and I wanted to do a pollinator garden there. So our conversation together with my council person, Brenda Gadd, who was very enthusiastic and supportive of the idea, said, well, hey, actually, we have this opening for District 24 commissioner. And how about you? So, you know, it's one of those classic, like, you ask a question, you've just created a job or more work for you to do. But
you want a pollinator garden? Here.
Yeah.
Here are the resources. You can do it.
Exactly. So it really started with, you know, as so many things do, identifying a need or an interest in my own neighborhood and then trying to figure out, how do I get this done? And that leading me to my council person, who said, here's one way you can get it done. You can step into this role. And so from there, it's really been a process of learning about all of the different Metro departments that touch beautification and environment, and then what resources they offer, and then how to take advantage of those.
Thank you for sharing that journey. I really appreciate the way that you just took on the project of becoming your district's beautification commissioner, having not really known about the commission. And I want to include, too, a quick plug that if you don't know who your council member is, I think your story really highlights that it's important to know what resources are available for us as residents, and your council member, your beautification commissioner, are examples of that. So you can look up who your council member is on nashville.gov. We'll link that resource in the description. But it's just important to know who your representatives are.
And I know a lot of these sustainability efforts, you know, rely on that strong community involvement. What roles do groups like neighborhood associations, local partnerships play in this work?
I'm just a huge advocate for collaboration and not reinventing the wheel. I think what I have participated in community-wise and witnessed just as Jane Q. Public is there is a lot of reinventing the wheel, and so my passion, in addition to sustainability, is how do we make it easier for people to be engaged in these opportunities, to find these resources, so that every time someone has an idea, they're not starting from scratch. And so that if somebody says, I have an idea for a pollinator garden, that they are not then going back through the entire process I've just gone through or am going through. So I think there is a vital role then between bridging the gap between the individual Davidson County resident, let's say, and Metro, and then these third parties, whether that's a neighborhood association, another nonprofit that's aligned or adjacent to the thing you're wanting to do or accomplish. And so those organizations are a really great bridge, because frankly, most people do not have the time nor the energy to do all of the legwork that is required to engage with Metro or to start something from scratch in their neighborhood or even in their own home for that matter. So making it as frictionless as possible, if you can bring all of those resources and understanding of what's available to neighborhood associations, to HOAs, if you can tap into other nonprofits like Harpeth Conservancy or Cumberland River Compact, these other sustainability, environmentally adjacent organizations, then you have just laid the runway down for individuals to be able to do the next thing that they want to do with as little friction as possible. And there's power in numbers. So, I have the support of the neighborhood association. For me, I'm a very active member in my neighborhood association, and they're excited about a pollinator garden. They're excited about creek cleanups. They're excited about planting more trees and introducing more native species into our neighborhood. So then we can use the power of the collective to then go to our council member and say, hey, all of us are excited about this thing. And then she can help work with me to coordinate with Metro. So it's really just about how do we create less friction and more seamless hubs to get people the information they need. Because the thing is, we're already paying for all of this. Our tax dollars are funding all of these things. So we should be using them as much as we possibly can. And when we don't, we're just leaving our own money on the table. So for me, it's also really important to get the word out to people. Hey, did you know this thing exists? Did you know you could be involved in this thing? Because I've already paid for it. You've already paid for it. So let's use it.
Last time we talked, you had shared that you come from a communications background rather than that environmental background, yet you've always found ways to make it engaging and accessible. How has that shaped your approach?
I think I'm coming to the topic of sustainability or conservation or environmentalism, however you want to define that, the way that most people do, which is just as a regular person. I don't have a degree in biology or chemistry or environmental science. And so I'm coming to this topic the way any other person would, which is I have an interest or I'm curious or I didn't even know this thing existed and maybe it found me rather than me seeking it out. That's really where my communication background comes in, because if, number one, people don't know something exists, then they can't use it. Number two, if you don't explain what the thing is or the things are, then people won't use them because they won't understand them. And then if you don't make it fun or interesting or engaging, people aren't going to use it. And so you have these different layers of, I keep saying the word friction, but that's really what it is. I mean, fundamentally humans are like, we just want the easiest path to whatever it is. So anytime a barrier or an obstacle is thrown up, that's another step that whatever's on the other side of that has to do to help somebody say, no, it's actually worth it. No, really, like you can recycle or you can, cut your energy bill by doing X, Y, and Z. So for me, coming at it from a communications and marketing standpoint is how do we make these ideas and these resources as fun, easy, and accessible as possible. And so one of the ways that I do that, and I have to do it for myself, like I get overwhelmed if I go to, let's say, the Metro website and I'm trying to find something very specific. That can be challenging because things roll up under different departments and they're collaborative, but they're going to be found in different places. And so just for me stepping into my role as commissioner, I was feeling overwhelmed as somebody who is like very actively engaged in all of this. And so I needed to create something for myself that was kind of like a cheat sheet almost of here are all the things that are available, and then putting that together in some kind of fun and interesting way. So I started putting a newsletter together that basically just highlights everything that is going on in our district, resources that are available. And for the most part, it's not even specific to my district. It's, these are things available to you, and how to get them. So, that's still in its very early stages, but that's one way that I am trying to pull all of these things together in one place, because it's digital, it's shareable, it's clickable, it's visual. I this comms background, and if you haven't noticed, that can be very verbal, very loquacious, like a lot of words when maybe two would do, and so it's also an exercise for me in, can I say this in the simplest, fastest, easiest way possible using, going back to kids, more pictures than words, because that is just the way that our brains are hardwired now to work. And so to that end as well, I have started an Instagram. It's at howdoi615, but it's basically taking all of the things that I've been talking about today and housing them in one central location. And it will heavily be aimed at sustainability and conservation, but it also cover other types of things that Davidson County residents maybe don't know they have access to. Like, how do I speak at a planning commission meeting? How do I speak at a Metro Council meeting? Things like that, where it just kind of becomes a one-stop shop, user-generated, how do I XYZ? So that's the idea.
That is really cool. The how do I, and because talk about accessibility, and in Metro government, or at least in our work team, we say plain language.
Yes.
Like using plain language, writing to, I believe it's 5th grade reading level is the standard that we are required to use. But anyway, the account about how to do different things to engage as a resident, I think that's super important, and lowering the barrier to entry of it feeling so intimidating to speak at a planning commission meeting or speak at a Metro Council meeting, and that these things are kind of rights that we have as residents. And so exercising them is just taking that right and using that right.
Absolutely.
So, yeah. Thank you for working to make that more accessible for folks.
Yeah.
I also wanted to go back and ask about the newsletter. How are people receiving your newsletter? How can anyone who's listening to the podcast sign up for the District 24 Beautification newsletter? Tell us more about that.
Okay, so it's embarrassingly lo-fi right at this moment. So right now it's just being distributed as a link through my council member. I send it to some neighborhood associations, post it on neighborhood association socials, things like that. So, I have not even transitioned into, an email service provider kind of setup. It is extremely, here's a link. So if people are interested, though, in receiving that, I will give you all the email address folks can reach me at. It is very long, and I'm so sorry about that.
We'll link it in the show notes.
Yes, it is very anti my approach to simplifying things.
Not the plain language.
Right, but I will give that as well. And, it's a work in progress. All of the sort of things that I'm trying to create as far as communication pieces go are really coming first from what do I need to be effective in this role. And, this is a volunteer position, so what capacity do I have in my personal life to be making and creating and sharing these resources? But I would love to get more people on that list, especially because there is so much in there that has nothing to do with District 24. It's just Davidson County in general.
Yeah. Wonderful.
And so pivoting into your motivators, what kind of keeps you going in this sustainability world and these sustainability efforts, and how do you inspire others?
Trauma is a great motivator.
Fair.
life experience happens and you're like, oh, there's more meaning to all of this than whatever. And so however that looks, there's a million ways you can be involved in your community and your neighborhood, the world. So it doesn't have to be, of course, environmental efforts, but I think that there is something really healing about service and community building, even if you're an extremely introverted person or kind of not a joiner at all. Like, there is a place for everyone. And so it comes back to that idea of how do we share all the ways in which somebody can be engaged in whatever way they feel most comfortable. And I stay motivated because, one, this stuff is just really important to me fundamentally. Two, it keeps me connected to my community and to the city. And three is that you can, especially with beautification and environment, you can see the fruits of your labor visually. You talked, Allie, about seeing some buttercups starting to bloom, and that's happening in my neighborhood too. And I know for certain that I planted those with my own hands and did not enjoy it. I'm much more, I like to rip out invasive species and pick up litter. Putting stuff in is so much harder. But it is one of those things where you can look and say, that literal flower I planted, and it is here to bring that little pop of yellow and sunshine and color to the neighborhood. And I'm really passionate too, just about what am I leaving for the people and generations behind me. One of the things I'm really passionate about is water quality, and going back to not having a biology, environmental science background, I'm coming to the idea of water quality from like a very just basic understanding of, or desire to have clean drinking water and to have environmental systems in place in a city that we know is very easily flooded. And what can I do as, an individual? And so water flows, water moves. It's not a thing where you can just point to and say like, okay, this square mile, we're gonna whatever. But we do creek cleanups. That's something we do with neighborhood associations. That's something we do with other conservation organizations. It's something that we do through the Beautification Commission. It's a larger problem because it involves stormwater, and involves our aging sewer system. Like, that's stuff that I cannot fix as one person, not financially, not bureaucratically, but I can, if I see a piece of trash, pick that up. I can volunteer 2 hours on a Saturday to do a creek cleanup. I can engage with information about what will make water quality better. If I've got bush honeysuckle growing in my backyard, I can get that out because it is an invasive plant species, and I can plant something else in its place with native species that Metro will provide you. But if you don't know that, if you don't even know what bush honeysuckle is, if you don't even know what an invasive species is. And so all of that stuff, I just want to, I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but just dumb it down to like a level I can understand, really. And all of that stuff starts to create less poopy water. And that's the goal.
It's a very clear and simple goal. All right, Kate, so you've mentioned so many wonderful resources during the course of this episode. I want to see if there's a few or one resource in particular that you've come across as a beautification commissioner, or as you've been learning more about Metro government, that you want to share with our listeners, something that surprised you or just stands out in your mind.
What has surprised me most since stepping into the beautification environment commissioner role really is just the wide breadth of resources that are available. that was very surprising to me. I did not know so many of these things existed. So I really encourage people to get on Nashville.gov, look at NDOT. That was a big surprise to me too, is the role that NDOT plays. You think of like traffic and signals and things like that, but they have a huge role in sustainability and environmental efforts because of the right-of-way in every square inch of this city. So I would say definitely look at NDOT's pages, Metro Water Services, Metro Waste Services, Metro Parks. Look at all of those different sites and click around, because there's just a ton of stuff out there. Even just understanding like the convenience centers that we have, where you can take your old TV or paint or compost or whatever. There's just so many things that you can get out of your home, and somebody else will take care of it for you. And again, that's that thing of like, somebody do it for me. And
Please.
Metro is here to help you with that. So I would just say really explore that website, even though I kind of dogged on it a little bit. But you can get my newsletter too, and it'll be much easier and cuter. And there's little butterflies and flowers and stuff. So
It is very cute.
Yeah.
I saw it.
yes, but use Metro. They're here for you. These things, again, you've already paid for them. They're yours. Take advantage of them, because if we don't, they go away.
Awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Kate, so much for sharing. And we like to end every single episode with a sustainability tip that we can tell listeners, or easy entry into sustainability. Do you have one for our listeners today?
Oh gosh, I'm kind of racking my brain of which one I would want to list. I'm also really passionate about residential energy efficiency, and so I think there are these little socket sealers that are really, really cheap. And so any of your external walls, you put this little socket sealer in, because cold air comes in during the winter through your outlets, and your air conditioning goes out of them in the summer. And so your dollars and cents are just flying out through your outlets. So that is a really, really quick and easy thing that you can do. And I think some of these sustainability efforts, when they can boost our personal bottom line, make them much more appealing to do.
Absolutely.
That's a great tip. Thank you. That's a wrap on another Sustainable in the City episode. Listeners can email us at sitcnashville@gmail.com to reach us. And Nashvillians, now that it's becoming springtime, go get outside and enjoy the flowers that are blooming and all of the wonderful things that make Nashville so beautiful. And the days are getting longer, so get outside and enjoy. See y'all.
Thanks for tuning in to Sustainable in the City. Sustainable in the City is produced by Urban Green Lab and the Nashville Department of Waste Services, a department of the Metropolitan Government of Nashville and Davidson County. Recording assistance is provided by the Nashville Public Library's Studio NPL team. Our theme song is produced by Draped Apes. Subscribe in all the places you listen to podcasts. To learn about trash, recycling, and composting services for Nashville residents, visit wasteservices.nashville.gov. For more tips on how to live sustainably, follow Urban Green Lab on social media at Urban Green Lab or online at urbangreenlab.org. Join us next time for more stories about small sustainable actions that are making a big impact on Nashville.